A plane doesn't just disappear, but in 2014, one did. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 vanished with 239 people on board, without a single distress call. Military radar later showed something even more unsettling. The aircraft had turned back deliberately, before going completely dark. No crash site, no black box, nothing. And then, years later, debris began to appear, not where the world had been searching, but thousands of kilometers away. Which meant one thing: the plane was never where they thought it was. So this isn't just a story about a disappearance. It's about a mistake, one that raises a far more disturbing question. Why was the world searching in the wrong place? And who knew that? This is Darkened Portal, where real stories are often darker than fiction. If you're new here, subscribe, because some mysteries were never meant to be solved. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 vanished. And what investigators uncovered later only made the mystery even worse. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur just after midnight on March 8, 2014. It was a routine red-eye flight heading toward Beijing, carrying 239 people on board. The weather was calm, the aircraft was in good condition, and both pilots were highly experienced. There was no indication that anything was about to go wrong. At 1:19 a.m., the cockpit sent its final routine message to air traffic control: "Good night, Malaysian 370. It was a standard sign-off as the plane prepared to enter Vietnamese airspace. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. But within minutes, the aircraft disappeared from civilian radar. At first, controllers assumed it was a technical issue. Radar dropouts happen. Communication delays happen. But what came next changed everything. Military radar picked up the aircraft, and it was no longer on its planned route. Instead of continuing north toward Beijing, MH370 made a sharp and deliberate turn. It crossed back over the Malaysian peninsula, flying in the exact opposite direction. This wasn't a minor deviation. It was a controlled maneuver, one that required human input. Someone in that cockpit had intentionally changed the course. For the next several hours, the aircraft continued flying. It wasn't broadcasting its position. It wasn't communicating. But it was still there, tracked intermittently by military systems as it moved across the Andaman Sea. And then, once again, it vanished. This time completely. No radar, no signals, no trace. What followed was one of the largest and most expensive search operations in aviation history. Multiple countries deployed ships, aircraft, and satellites, all focused on the South China Sea, where the plane was originally expected to be. But days passed, and nothing was found. No debris, no oil slick, no signs of a crash, because they were searching in the wrong place. Weeks into the investigation, satellite data revealed something deeply unsettling. MH370 hadn't disappeared when it left radar. It had continued flying for hours afterward. Using handshake signals between the aircraft and a satellite, investigators were able to estimate its path. And that path didn't lead north. It led south, deep into the Indian Ocean, one of the most remote and least accessible regions on Earth. No nearby airports, no populated islands, just endless water stretching for thousands of kilometers. If the plane went down there, recovery would be nearly impossible, which meant something chilling. The aircraft likely kept flying until it ran out of fuel. Alone, silent, unseen. Search efforts shifted to this new zone, covering vast stretches of ocean floor using sonar and deep-sea scanning technology. It was a race against time, against geography, and against uncertainty. Months turned into years, and still, nothing was found. Then, in 2015, a piece of wreckage washed up on Réunion Island, off the eastern coast of Africa. It was identified as a flaperon from MH370. Finally, physical proof that the aircraft had crashed. But instead of solving the mystery, it made things worse. Because if debris had drifted all the way to Africa, the crash site had to be located somewhere far across the Indian Ocean. Ocean current models were used to estimate where it might have originated. But even those models didn't align perfectly with the original search zones. More debris appeared over time, on the coasts of Mozambique, Madagascar, and Tanzania. Each piece confirmed the same thing. MH370 had ended up in the southern Indian Ocean, but the exact location remained unknown. And that raised a serious question. How do you search for years in the most likely area and still miss a massive aircraft? Investigators began looking closer at the human element. The captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, became a central focus. He was experienced, respected, and had logged thousands of flight hours. But investigators discovered something unusual. At his home, he had built a highly detailed flight simulator. And on that simulator, there were flight paths. One of them closely resembled a route into the southern Indian Ocean. A long, uninterrupted flight, ending far from any land. This discovery fueled a controversial theory that the disappearance was intentional, that the plane had been deliberately diverted and flown into isolation. But there was no definitive proof, no suicide note, no clear motive. His background didn't strongly support the theory. It remained speculation, not conclusion. Other theories emerged: possible hijacking, a sudden decompression event, an electrical fire that disabled communication systems. Each theory explained part of the puzzle, but not all of it, because one detail refused to fit: the complete and total loss of communication. Modern aircraft are designed with multiple redundant systems. Even if one fails, others continue transmitting. For MH370 to go completely silent, several systems would have had to be disabled manually in a specific sequence. That's not random failure. That's deliberate action. And yet, no one claimed responsibility. No group, no individual, no demands. Nothing. Just silence. Even the final moments of the flight remain uncertain. One leading theory suggests that the cabin lost pressure, causing passengers and crew to slowly lose consciousness due to lack of oxygen. The plane, left on autopilot, continued flying until it ran out of fuel and crashed into the ocean. If that's true, then the end of MH370 was quiet. No panic, no struggle, just a gradual fade into darkness. But even that theory leaves gaps. Why the turn? Why disable communication? Why fly for hours in a precise direction? The deeper you look into this case, the more it stops making sense. And that's what makes MH370 different from other aviation disasters. It's not just that the plane disappeared. It's that, despite all the technology, all the resources, and all the time, it was never truly found. In a world where we can track smartphones in real time and monitor aircraft across continents, a massive commercial jet carrying 239 people vanished without a trace, and stayed that way, which leads to a possibility that is far more uncomfortable than any theory. Not that we don't know what happened, but that something about this case was never meant to be fully understood. 239 people boarded that flight, and none of them were ever seen again. No final message, no confirmed crash site, just fragments scattered across an ocean that refuses to give answers. MH370 wasn't just a disappearance. It became a mystery the world still can't solve, and maybe never will. So what do you think really happened? Pilot involvement, mechanical failure, or something we still don't understand? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes the truth doesn't disappear. It's just never found.